Maxine Waters referred to Senator Kennedy as a country lawyer originating from Shreveport, asserting he possessed zero right interpreting financial markets before her panel. She avoided grinning when she delivered the remark, which highlighted the distinction separating Maxine Waters from absolutely every other individual operating in Washington who mastered disguising an insult within polite language. Waters completely refused to disguise her statements. She projected them with a lowered vocal tone and direct gaze, utilizing the deep resonance of an official who commanded this panel, occupied this chamber, and terminated professional trajectories using this exact audio equipment for a period exceeding the entire lifespan of several colleagues. I desire to welcome Senator Kennedy representing Louisiana, she announced, describing a region where predatory lenders heavily outnumber food markets within minority districts. This senator actively opposed every single consumer defense legislation this panel generated throughout the past 6 years. Therefore, I am fascinated regarding whatever wisdom he introduces toward a dialogue concerning the protection of communities he dedicated his entire professional life to leaving vulnerable. The audience reacted not with clapping, but rather a quiet rumble of agreement, representing the unified breath of an audience entirely captivated by the individual occupying the central platform. Positioned behind Waters, her media director Tanya permitted herself to scribble a solitary observation upon her legal pad, noting the strong opening and effective messaging while drawing a line beneath the phrase. John Kennedy offered zero vocal response, avoided readjusting his audio equipment, refused to lean closer within his seat, and refrained from wiping his spectacles just yet. He rested his palm atop a beige folder resting against the desk directly before him, aligning its borders perfectly parallel with the desk edge, and he paused in the exact manner a person pauses when they have occupied similar chambers previously and comprehend that the initial 60 seconds belong entirely to the individual speaking, whereas the subsequent 59 minutes belong to the individual actively listening. 7 moments elapsed before he stated, "Chairwoman, I value the greeting, and you possess accuracy regarding my Louisiana origins. We absolutely possess an excessive amount of predatory lenders alongside an insufficient amount of food markets, which represents an issue I desire to rectify. However, this proceeding focuses upon defending minority districts against exploitative financial organizations," he stated while opening the folder. "And I concur with the chairwoman that minority districts require defense. Therefore, I wish to commence examining one particular organization, one particular district, and one specific telephone conversation." He recited information from the initial document, noting a single entry detailing that on September 9, 2008, the chairwoman's staff organized a gathering involving leadership from One United Bank alongside top executives operating within the United States Treasury Department. Within a matter of weeks, One United secured $12 million through TARP Rescue Capital, representing public funds specifically reserved for organizations deemed critical toward stabilizing the economic framework. He elevated his gaze, noting the chairwoman's spouse, Sidney Williams, possessed equity shares within One United Bank, and Mr. Williams previously functioned upon the institution's governing board. Waters shifted aggressively toward her audio equipment, executing a movement that felt instantaneous rather than defensive, displaying the physical repetition of an official who dedicated 30 years toward dominating chambers by strictly commanding the audio equipment. "I am reclaiming my time, Mr. Chairman, I am reclaiming my time," which the presiding official formally recognized, prompting Kennedy to halt.
In response to your request, here is a professional paraphrase of the provided text, using Native American English grammar and avoiding phrasing that might violate YouTube community guidelines. It is structured with a line break every 5 sentences to maintain the narrative prose style. Mr. Vice President, prior to the commencement of your formal statement, it is crucial that the American citizenry understands precisely the identity of the individual occupying that seat. Maxine Waters interjected these remarks even before the chairman could conclude his initial remarks, delivering them with her customary loudness, conviction, and a clear focus directed not towards the man opposite her, but towards the recording equipment positioned behind him. 33 years spent within this specific chamber had thoroughly educated her on the precise orientation of every camera lens, and she was careful not to expend a single word in a direction that would not be captured. Vance was positioned at the testimony table, located 6 feet below the raised platform, casting his gaze upwards, attired in a white dress shirt without a jacket, his sleeves unrolled and relaxed at his wrists. A well-worn volume of Hillbilly Elegy rested face down on the table adjacent to a glass of water that had remained untouched, as he had arrived without any formal written statement, binder, or supporting staff, carrying only the book and a writing utensil. Waters considered this chamber her personal domain, having previously presided over the House Financial Services Committee, and it was in this very space that she had transformed "reclaiming my time" into a well-known national phrase, where she had even compelled high-level Treasury officials to respond with brief, single-syllable answers. At that identical microphone, the plaque before her designated her role as the ranking member, yet nearly everyone within the facility continued to address her as Madam Chair, some doing so out of deference, others out of apprehension, and the vast majority simply due to ingrained custom. Vance observed her with the steady gaze of an individual monitoring an approaching storm moving across a level plain, displaying neither alarm nor false confidence, but rather the collected evaluation of a person who has endured more significant challenges. 40 minutes hence, the very Congresswoman responsible for popularizing that celebrated national catchphrase would come to understand that certain concessions, once yielded, can never be truly recovered. Without awaiting official authorization to proceed, a customary practice for her, Congresswoman Waters, acting as the chair, resumed speaking. The individual seated in the witness box authored a publication, a somber and somewhat modest narrative detailing a childhood marked by poverty in Ohio, featuring a mother with significant personal issues and the grandmother who assumed his upbringing. This work became a significant bestseller, garnishing endorsement from Oprah and adaptation into a major motion picture, which Mr. Vance leveraged to secure admission to Yale Law School, a presence in Silicon Valley, substantial financial backing from Peter Thiel, and ultimately the position of Vice President of the United States. She momentarily halted, not due to any physical need for respiration, as that was never an issue for Waters, but rather to create a strategic, dramatic pause. The Democratic members of the committee leaned forward with anticipation, while from the public viewing area an audible whisper urged, "Let's hear it, Maxine." And now this individual, a seeming creation of the venture capital sphere, a project perceived as being funded by billionaires, occupies that very seat and claims to have an understanding of the challenges faced by ordinary working Americans. Waters emitted a laughter that was more forceful and rhythmic in nature than genuinely humorous. "Oh, please, Mr. Vice President, you are unfamiliar with genuine hardship. Rather, you have leveraged your experiences for financial gain, packaging them within a book cover and retailing it for $27 at Barnes & Noble." This statement elicited applause from the public section, which the chairman acknowledged with a single cursory gesture, as Waters' team immediately began extracting the relevant audio segment. "I have been actively advocating for communities like yours since long before your birth, Mr. Vice President. I was physically present on the streets of South Central during the Rodney King unrest, whereas in 1992 you were an elementary school student in Ohio, presumably occupied with crayon drawings while Los Angeles was on fire." Directing her words towards the Democratic colleagues seated on either side of her on the raised platform, she stated, "This individual was positioned at a desk within Silicon Valley, accumulating significant wealth by advising affluent clients on investment opportunities. Venture capital, you are all aware of its nature. It is a form of speculation involving other individuals' aspirations, where you identify a fledgling company, provide funding, and should it collapse, and those who established it lose everything, you simply record it as a loss and proceed to the next venture. That represents this individual's entire understanding of the working class." She directed her finger towards Vance with emphasis, asserting, "You did not actively champion the cause of anyone in Middletown, Ohio. Instead, you departed. You enlisted in the Marines, which is a commendable act, and for that service, I thank you. But then you relocated for Ohio State University, subsequently left for Yale, and finally made your way to San Francisco. You consistently moved away, Mr. Vice President, and now you return, claiming to comprehend the difficulties of the individuals you abandoned, all while communicating this from the comforts of the Vice President's official residence at the Naval Observatory. The atmosphere in the public gallery was charged with energy, and an individual initiated a chant of anti-Maxine, which the chairman attempted to quell, though it continued to simmer beneath the surface, much like water approaching its boiling point. Waters had not concluded her remarks. She adjusted her spectacles, distinctively large and angular, a characteristic accessory that had become as integral to her personal branding as her famous catchphrase, and prepared to deliver what she undoubtedly intended as a decisive blow. Let me articulate something specific about this individual, for the benefit of the cameras and the entire American populace. He is a product of Peter Thiel's making. A billionaire discovered a young man from an impoverished background with a somber narrative, groomed him, financed his political campaign, and positioned him within the Senate, akin to a ventriloquist operating a puppet. And currently, that perceived puppet occupies the office of Vice President of the United States. Do not even contemplate entering this committee room and attempting to instruct me on matters concerning working individuals. You are merely a facade, Mr. Vance, an unauthentic populist persona, and I can discern the lack of substance beneath. Addressing the cameras with the polished timing of someone who had been performing before them since long before Vance was even born, she declared, "I am reclaiming my time because this particular administration is undeserving of it." The familiar phrase resonated with its characteristic impact, generating a thunderous burst of applause, enthusiastic shouts from the public, and synchronized chants of reclaiming my time from supporters who had been eagerly anticipating this moment. For a brief interval, the hearing room bore less resemblance to a formal congressional session than to an impassioned revival gathering, with Maxine Waters assuming the role of the central preacher. Her personnel were broadcasting the event live, and a segment was already being edited for distribution, with the specified hashtag Maxine gaining significant momentum on social media before her address had even concluded. Vance remained entirely passive throughout this entire sequence, without even shifting his position, not communicating with any aide, as he had arrived unaccompanied by any staff, and exhibiting no change in expression, neither a smile nor a frown nor any observable reaction beyond making a solitary note on the reverse of his book, utilizing a writing implement that appeared to have been sourced from a lodging establishment. He quietly awaited the return of composure in the chamber with the patience of an individual observing a kettle reach a boil, knowing with certainty that the state will eventually run its course, and when the inevitable quiet arrived, as applause like fire ultimately runs out of oxygen, Vance adjusted himself and moved closer to his microphone. "I express my gratitude, Congresswoman." That was, he appeared to contemplate the precise descriptor, spirited. He then retrieved his writing utensil and lightly tapped it once against the table's surface. "My grandmother, or Mama as she was known to those unfamiliar with the previously mentioned modest narrative, would have undoubtedly appreciated you, as she possessed a similar level of vigor, particularly when she saw fit to pursue my grandfather off the front porch with a 12-gauge shotgun for returning home intoxicated on a Tuesday evening." He maintained a serious expression, continuing, "She was a resilient woman, a regular smoker of Marlboro cigarettes until her death, who assumed responsibility for my upbringing when my mother was unable, and never achieved an annual income exceeding $30,000. Directing his gaze directly towards Waters, he stated, "However, as you have initiated a discussion regarding my personal history, Congresswoman, perhaps it is appropriate that we examine each of our respective experiences. You contend that you have been championing the cause of ordinary working people for 33 years, but as I was raised as one of those very individuals, I would like to offer a perspective on that advocacy from the viewpoint of those whom you claim to represent." He unclasped his book, turning to a worn, folded-down page, not with the intention of reading, but merely to hold an object in his hands. "Let us initiate a discussion concerning a specific financial institution, one associated with the Financial Services Committee on which you serve, Congresswoman, a committee you once chaired, positioned as a key Democratic figure in banking policy nationwide for many years, so perhaps you can assist me in comprehending a certain matter. Waters displayed a momentary, subtle tensing of her posture, barely perceptible to the casual observer but noted by the journalist seated in the foremost row. In September 2008, as the nation's financial system was on the verge of collapsing, I was a 24-year-old recent Marine Corps BACN veteran, witnessing my neighbors in Middletown face the loss of their homes. Individuals who had dedicated their entire careers to the local steel mill, people who had diligently made every mortgage payment on schedule, were receiving foreclosure notifications simply because financial institutions had engaged in speculative practices with their funds and incurred significant losses. He paused momentarily, allowing the mental imagery of a steel town, foreclosure notices, and working individuals to sink into the consciousness of the room. These individuals were unable to even secure a return phone call from a banking representative, let alone schedule a meeting with their local branch manager, much less a high-ranking official like the Secretary of the Treasury. However, it is evident that someone was in fact getting meetings. The chief executive officer of a specific financial institution named One United was granted an audience with the Treasury, and the individual responsible for that communication, who directly contacted the office of Secretary Henry Paulson, was you. I facilitated a meeting for the National Bankers Association, Waters retorted with crispness, continuing, an organization that represents minority-owned financial institutions rather than just one single bank, an association. Vance responded with a nod, saying, that was indeed my initial interpretation as well. However, the crucial point is that every single representative who participated in that meeting had significant ties to One United, with no connection to any other minority-owned financial institutions. It was exclusively One United. And One United requested $50 million in TARP bailout funds from the Treasury, $50 million sourced directly from American taxpayers. They ultimately were allocated $12 million, which was considered an appropriate amount based on their specific situation. Vance simultaneously noted this figure on the reverse side of his book. Now, I wish to proceed with caution, as I am merely a young person from Ohio and have no desire to misstate any facts. Your spouse, Sidney Williams, a former professional football player and ambassador, served on the board of directors for One United, is that correct? He had formerly served on the board, and at the juncture of the meeting that you facilitated, he possessed a stockholding of approximately $350,000 in One United. Stock that, as indicated by the official report of the Ethics Committee itself, would have been rendered devoid of any value had the financial institution collapsed. A perceptible shift occurred within the hearing room, making the democratic applause of just 5 minutes prior seem like a distant memory belonging to an entirely different era. So, allowing me to confirm my comprehension of the chronological order, your spouse possesses stock in a specific financial institution. That institution faces imminent failure, and should that failure occur, your spouse would sustain a loss of $350,000. Subsequently, you contact the Treasury Secretary, a meeting ensues, the institution is allocated $12 million in public funds, and as a direct consequence, your spouse's investment is protected. He paused momentarily, allowing the numerical logic to resonate, and then proceeded, I wish to place this into appropriate perspective, as significant figures like $12 million can seem abstracted and easily dismissed in the environment of Washington, D.C. In 2008, in my hometown of Middletown, Ohio, the median home value was approximately $80,000. Therefore, a sum of $12 million could have prevented the foreclosure of 150 homes, allowing that many families to remain in their residences, keep their children enrolled in their existing schools, and preserve the stability of their lives. Instead, those public funds were allocated to a specific financial institution where your spouse was a member of the board of directors. He directed his attention towards the cameras, not for dramatic purpose, but due to the fact that his subsequent remarks were intended specifically for the viewing public. No one made a call to the Treasury Secretary on behalf of those families, nor did anyone facilitate any meetings, They simply received a formal notification in the mail and a lock placed upon their front door. Reorienting his focus back towards Waters, he stated, "You contend that your actions were taken on behalf of all minority-owned financial institutions, as you claim. However, it is worth noting that Chairman Barney Frank, your designated committee chair and a political ally, issued you a specific warning advising you to recuse yourself from matters involving One United due to your spouse's significant connections. He indicated his intention to personally manage the situation, and you assured him you would cease your involvement, yet your grandson, who served as your own chief of staff, continued to take action regardless." "I was formally exonerated by the Ethics Committee," Waters retorted, her voice rising, not to its typical performance level, but with an undercurrent of genuine raw emotion, continuing, "With a unanimous decision, a count of 10-0. This is a matter of long-standing public record that has been thoroughly investigated and definitively settled." "You are accurate in your assertion," Vance responded, his tone remaining even and neutral. "You indeed received clearance, however, your grandson did not." A profound stillness settled over the chamber. "Your chief of staff, Mikhail Moore, who is also your grandson, was formally issued a letter of approval by the Ethics Committee. The committee concluded that he ought to have been cognizant of your inherent conflict of interest and consequently discontinued any assistance towards One United. Yet he did not cease his activities. Rather, he persisted in making calls, exerting influence, and utilizing telephonic communications in favor of a specific financial institution in which your spouse possessed a material financial interest. And all of these actions were undertaken utilizing the facilities of your official office under the authority of your name and using your public resources." Vance clasped his book shut. "Now, Congresswoman," the Ethics Committee officially stated, "you acknowledge the conflict of interest and attempted to withdraw your involvement, and I am prepared to accept their formal conclusion on this matter. However, I possess considerable knowledge regarding family dynamics, particularly those that are dysfunctional, having authored an extensive work focused precisely on that subject. When your grandson, employed in your official office and utilizing public communication resources, engages in actions that you reportedly instructed him to avoid, and the direct outcome is the protection of your spouse's stockholding of $350,000 that cannot be dismissed as a simple personnel mistake. Rather, it is indicative of either a substantial supervisory lapse or an entirely different situation." He momentarily halted, adding, "And within my own family perspective, when an individual for whom you are responsible, operating under your authority, acts improperly while you are in charge, the appropriate response is not to assign blame to them and declare it their error, but rather to assume personal accountability for the situation. In the community from which I hail, that is the fundamental understanding of family obligation." He paused once more, then suggested, "However, perhaps that particular term carries a distinct connotation within your own family structure. For, on the topic of family, I would like to inquire about your daughter and a specific commercial entity. Your daughter, Karen Waters, oversees a company designated as Progressive Connections. Since 2003, your political campaign has compensated that specific company, your daughter's enterprise, with an amount exceeding $1.2 million. $1.2 million, Congresswoman, ostensibly for services rendered such as the creation of slate mailers, pamphlets, and flyers." Vance retrieved his writing implement and began performing calculations on the reverse side of his book, doing so deliberately and in full view, much like an individual meticulously reconciling a checkbook at a kitchen table. "The typical annual household income within the specific district you represent is approximately $40,000. Therefore, the $1.2 million represents the total earnings of an average family within your district over a span of 30 years, a complete working career. 30 years of daily labor, of commuting to a job, returning home, settling financial obligations, and rearing children. Yet your daughter accumulated that same amount merely by producing informational pamphlets for your political campaign." Directing his gaze upwards, he said, "Allow me to provide a breakdown of these figures by election cycle, as the numerical data is noteworthy. During the 2020 election campaign, Karen received a payment of $250,000 from your organization. In the subsequent period spanning from 2021 to 2022, an additional sum of $192,000 was paid. And in 2023, another payment of $81,000 was made. She is compensated on a semi-monthly basis with individual payments ranging from $2,000 to $6,000, as indicated by official filings with the Federal Election Commission. These, Congresswoman, are a matter of public record and can be accessed by anyone. He placed his writing utensil down, stating, "However, here is the specific detail that truly commanded my focus. You stand alone as the singular federal politician in the entire United States who utilizes slate mailers on a national scale. Absolutely no other member of Congress operates a comparable system. It bears resemblance to being the proprietor of the only lemonade stand in the entire nation, and your daughter happens to be the individual managing it." He momentarily allowed that mental imagery, the sole lemonade stand, the daughter, and the millions of dollars, to resonate within the context of the hearing. A specific Republican member of Congress, Pat Fallon from Texas, sponsored a bill expressly intended to prohibit this particular activity, designating it as the FIRE Act, an acronym for Family Integrity to Reform Elections. And upon presenting this legislation, he explicitly identified you by name, characterizing you as, and I quote, "the single most extreme offender." This is certainly not a typical occurrence, a piece of legislation explicitly crafted around the individual conduct of one specific person. "My daughter exerts significant effort for that compensation," Waters retorted sharply, her voice strained, expressing a sentiment that appeared to be a mix of intense anger and defensive protective instinct. "She operates a valid and lawful commercial enterprise, and I will not submit to being lectured on the topic of family values by an individual whose personal wealth was amassed with significant financial backing from Peter Thiel." This reactive statement appeared to have an effect as multiple Democratic colleagues nodded in agreement, acknowledging that a valid point had been made, for it was a widely recognized fact that Vance had received significant funding from a billionaire. Vance seemed to take this point into consideration, responding with a deliberate nod. "You are accurate in your assertion that Peter Thiel invested in my professional life. That is, in fact, a matter of public record, which I have never sought to conceal, and I am certainly not embarrassed by it." He set his writing utensil down, continuing, "However, allow me to articulate the fundamental distinction, Congresswoman. Peter Thiel is not my daughter, nor is he my grandson. He is not on my personal payroll as an employee, and he was not the recipient of any corresponding letter of approval issued by the Ethics Committee. Furthermore, I did not direct campaign contributions totaling anywhere from $1.2 to $2 million towards a company he controls over the course of 2 decades, specifically to produce promotional flyers. When I received financial support from Mr. Thiel, the transaction was fully disclosed, a matter of public record, entirely legal, and conducted through appropriate professional channels. He did not reside within my personal home, nor did he participate in private family gatherings such as Thanksgiving. Rather, he was an external investor who possessed confidence in my specific endeavors, and every single cent of that financial arrangement is documented in the public record." He moved himself slightly closer to the table, continuing, "Additionally, it is a fact that your son, Edward Jr., also receives compensation as a paid consultant for the political campaigns which you formally endorse. So to summarize, you have your grandson serving as your primary chief of staff, your daughter managing your mass mailing operations for an amount totaling over $1 million, and your son providing paid consulting services on an ongoing basis. Upon being questioned regarding these matters back in 2004, your response, which I found so remarkable I made a specific note of it, was, 'They manage their respective business affairs, and I attend to mine. We are certainly not unethical individuals.'" Vance reiterated the final phrase, speaking each word with a deliberate and separate cadence, stating, "We are certainly not unethical individuals." Perhaps that is an accurate self-assessment, Congresswoman. However, a nonpartisan oversight organization, specifically Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, commonly referred to as CREW, designated you as among the most corrupt members of Congress on 4 separate occasions. in 2005, 2006, 2009, and 2011, indeed 4 times. That does not reflect typical political grandstanding or a partisan Republican targeted attack. Rather, Crew operates as a nonpartisan body, consistently scrutinizing representatives from both major parties, and they focused on your conduct on 4 distinct occasions. Waters was firmly grasping the perimeter of the raised platform. Her staff members had ceased their continuous extraction of audio segments, and the live broadcast initiated by her communications director at the very beginning of the hearing was experiencing a substantial reduction in viewership, dropping from a previous maximum of 1.88 million individuals during her Reclaiming My Time moment to fewer than 600,000 currently. However, do you wish to understand what truly troubles me? It is not merely the expenditure of funds to compensate political consultants, some of whom may be related to the elected official, as that is a practice that occurs within both major political parties, and I am not prepared to make an assertion to the contrary. What profoundly troubles me is the significant disparity, the chasm between the original source of those funds, which consists of working individuals contributing small donations of $25 or $50 to a representative they genuinely believe in, and the final destination of that money, which is within the commercial coffers of your daughter's enterprise, ostensibly for informational pamphlets. He momentarily halted, adding, "And that particular disparity directs my focus towards a related matter because an equivalent significant gap exists within your personal geography, specifically between your personal mansion and the district that you are elected to represent. Congresswoman, you have previously characterized me as a superficial populist, asserting that I do not possess a true comprehension of the working people. So allow me to articulate for you precisely what my understanding encompasses." Vance's tone shifted, not increasing in volume or harshness, but rather taking on a more resonant depth, the voice of an individual moving beyond typical public performance to access deeply ingrained memories, past mere political considerations, and into something with a visceral, embodied presence. "I was raised in a household where the screen door remained unrepaired for a span of 3 years due to our complete inability to afford the cost of the necessary repairs. For 3 consecutive years, with every single instance of an individual passing through it, the hinge would malfunction and the frame would forcibly strike the wall, causing a successive small amount of paint to flake away. My grandmother consistently stated that she intended to perform the necessary repair during the subsequent month, a promise she reiterated with each passing month until the juncture of my departure for service in the Marine Corps. Upon my eventual return from deployment in Iraq, the door remained in that very same broken condition." He momentarily allowed that mental visual, a screen door with a non-functioning hinge persisting for 3 years, to take hold of the hearing. "I possess a visceral understanding of the distinct aroma that accompanies the heating being disconnected during a freezing January, when your grandmother is compelled to ignite the oven and leave its door ajar to generate some warmth within the house, all due to an inability to settle the natural gas bill. I am intimately familiar with the specific auditory experience of hearing your mother's significant other violently propel a ceramic plate against the wall at 2 o'clock in the morning, a sound that compels you to draw the bedding over your face and imagine yourself in a completely different location. I have a first-hand visual comprehension of the specific appearance of a community when its singular major manufacturing plant ceases operations, and subsequently, every single male resident on your entire street is suddenly burdened with an abundance of unoccupied time and a concomitant deficiency in their sense of personal dignity. Casting his gaze towards Waters, he stated, "The specific district you represent, California's 43rd, bears a strong visual resemblance to the very community in which I was raised. Different geographical coordinates perhaps, but the exact same fundamental suffering. A prevalence of poverty that remains well above 20%, persistent gang-related conflicts, and a crisis of homelessness that has continuously escalated in severity with each consecutive year you have occupied this office. The educational institutions are consistently positioned among the lowest-performing schools within the entire state of California. The individuals residing within that area, the very constituents you are elected to serve, are contending with their own personal metaphors of a broken screen door and are hearing their own plates shatter against walls. They have been actively waiting for 33 consecutive years for their elected representative to perform any meaningful, tangible repair in their lives. He momentarily halted, and the ensuing quiet was of a sufficient duration that every person within the chamber could discern its gravity. And meanwhile, you maintain your primary residence within a $4.8 million estate located in the affluent Hancock Park neighborhood. 5 subsequent distinct, heavy-laden details followed: a gated wrought iron perimeter, an extensive indoor swimming facility, a vast 6,000-square-foot Mediterranean-inspired residence, pristine landscaped grounds meticulously tended by a private contracting firm, a total of 17 building permits for modifications issued since the property was acquired in 2004, including a custom indoor pool feature and a dedicated propane gas supply line extending to an external cooking area. Among your surrounding residents are high-profile figures such as the current mayor of the city of Los Angeles. He carefully positioned his book on the table, stating, "Furthermore, it is a significant fact that your extensive personal estate is situated completely outside of the specific district you represent, Congresswoman." The declaration seemed to resonate with a visceral, physical impact throughout the public gallery as numerous heads turned in reaction and journalists worked diligently on their keyboards. You are not a resident sharing the same postal code as the individuals who consistently cast their ballots for you. The specific individuals who return you to this position every 2 years, the ones diligently waiting in line at the grocery store, the ones frequently hearing the discharge of firearms during the night, and the ones forced to carefully maneuver around homeless encampments simply to access the local bus stop. They must return to their homes within South Central, while you proceed to your primary residence in Hancock Park, secured behind a gate and a perimeter wall. He once more retrieved his book, the previously mentioned modest narrative concerning an upbringing in poverty. You offered a critique of this specific publication earlier, asserting that I had leveraged my life story for financial gain. Perhaps that is an accurate assessment, but allow me to articulate for you precisely what actions I did not undertake. I did not dedicate 33 consecutive years of my professional life to representing an economically disadvantaged district and subsequently relocate to an expansive personal estate on the opposite side of the city. I did not erect physical walls and secure gates to encircle my personal residence, all while publicly advocating a position to others that physical barriers are an ineffective solution. I did not accept a substantial annual salary of $174,000 for 3 consecutive decades, while simultaneously witnessing the typical income of my constituents remain stagnant at approximately $40,000. He placed the book back onto the table's surface. During my time as a high school student, my family was utterly incapable of affording the necessary repairs to that specific screen door. Your official property building permits indicate a total expenditure exceeding $1 million on renovations, that specific amount dedicated purely to property modifications, all occurring since 2004. You saw fit to construct a private indoor swimming facility, Congresswoman, and are you even aware of how many individuals residing within your specific district have ever had the opportunity to even experience being in such a specialized environment? How dare you make such an insinuation? Waters interjected, rising to her feet and forcefully striking the surface of the raised platform with her hand, a blow that resonated through the room with a sound akin to a firearm's discharge. The glass of water positioned before the chairman made a visible jumping motion, causing 2 journalists seated in the foremost row to recoil with a visible flinch. You are completely uninformed about the actions I have taken on behalf of my community, and you possess no genuine comprehension of the distinct experience of being a black woman in this nation, contending for every single opportunity and resource on a daily basis against individuals like yourself, against individuals who harbor a desire to actively undermine our efforts, who seek to appropriate all that we have meticulously constructed, and who contemplate entering this chamber, which I regard as my personal professional domain, indeed my chamber, and attempt to demolish that which I have dedicated my entire adult life to establishing. Her voice completely resonated throughout the chamber, conveying an immense visceral and unbridled emotion. This was certainly not the characteristic rehearsed persona of Maxine Waters frequently observed during cable news interviews. nor was it a strategic assertion of reclaiming my time. This reflected a profound and potentially more potent sentiment, the culmination of 33 years of continuous authority, a period of never having her positions or conduct meaningfully questioned within her own personal domain, all of it spilling forth in a singular, powerful outburst that she seemed unable to suppress and appeared to have no inclination to restrain. I was physically present during the time of widespread civil unrest when this city was in flames. I was actively present on the streets of South Central at the juncture that the National Guard was mobilized. I personally offered support and comfort to mothers whose sons had been victims of officer-involved shootings with the LAPD. Where were you at that significant historical moment? In Ohio, in your deteriorating residence with its characteristic unrepaired screen door, presumably wallowing in self-pity and documenting the difficulties of your life in a modest journal? I have meticulously constructed this specific community. I chose to remain and actively contend for its welfare, whereas you opted to depart. She was now directing her gaze specifically towards Vance, her finger emphatically extended and her arm completely rigid, in a non-verbal gesture characteristic of an individual leveling a serious accusation of criminal wrongdoing against another person. Her spectacles had undergone a minor, subtle adjustment to their positioning, and her voice had become noticeably strained and raspy. The Democratic Committee members positioned on either side of her appeared to be in a state of complete immobility, with not a single one making any move to provide physical reassurance or whispering the suggestion, "Maxine, perhaps you should resume your seat." They were thoroughly cognizant that such an action would be ill-advised. It was common knowledge that one did not engage physically with Maxine Waters when she exhibited such intense emotion, and the only prudent course of action was to patiently wait for the metaphorical storm to subside. Yet this significant outburst had not been without a crucial error, for in the absolute peak of her impassioned declaration, she had made the specific assertion, "I chose to remain." Vance patiently allowed a span of 5, 10, 15 seconds to elapse, permitting the literal echo of her impassioned voice to dissipate entirely until the only remaining sounds within the chamber were the low hum from the climate control system, the faint, consistent scratching of pens from the press gallery, and the distant, isolated electronic notification of a phone that had inadvertently remained unsilenced. Then he spoke in a subdued tone, characterized by the specific manner in which an individual might address someone who has just communicated a deeply held yet entirely inaccurate conviction. "Did you in fact choose to remain in that community, Congresswoman?" "It is," he inquired, his voice barely exceeding a conversational level, continuing, "because it is a matter of official record that your primary address is listed as Hancock Park rather than South Central." 7 distinct words were articulated, void of any specific rhetorical emphasis, palpable anger, or a sense of personal triumph. Merely 7 simple words, delivered as level as a table surface, and with the absolute factual truth of mathematical principles. The subsequent silence that descended upon the chamber was not the typical momentary pause of rhetorical structure. It was the distinct, profound quiet indicative of a complete and irrevocable fracture, not occurring with dramatic noise, but absolutely, much like a bone finally giving way after significant physical stress has relentlessly accumulated over a span of many years, with one final minimal instance of pressure, considerably lighter than all that preceded it, proving to be the definitive force that initiates the irrevocable snap. The assembled gathering was still as Vance patiently allowed Waters to resume her seat before he proceeded, adding, "She did not choose to sit because of an official directive from the chairman. She chose to be seated because the intense outburst had expended an emotional reservoir that was not easily replenished." Her accompanying staff members, specifically 3 aides who had been intensely and continuous texting various clips and communication strategies, had become completely motionless. One particular individual was now casting a direct, unmoving gaze at her phone screen, where the live broadcast's viewer count, which had formerly achieved a maximum of 1.88 million during Waters' prominent Reclaiming My Time segment, currently registered at less than 400,000 and was steadily decreasing. The continuous feed of comments had also undergone a transformation, no longer characterized by a supportive tone, but instead populated with numerous question marks and the simple word wow reiterated in various typographical arrangements. Congresswoman, I wish to initiate a discussion specifically concerning public statements because you have occupied a position within Congress for 33 consecutive years, and over that period you have generated a vast collection of remarks, some of which are well known, while others arguably merit greater attention. He did not require any formal notes, speaking entirely from personal memory, with the characteristic fluidness of an author quoting distinct passages that he has read 100 times. In 1992, in the immediate aftermath of the profound civil unrest within Los Angeles, following the tragic deaths of 63 individuals, injuries to over 2,000 people, the arrests of more than 12,000 citizens, and the destruction of $1 billion in property, you publicly characterized the entire event as a rebellion. Utilizing the specific phraseology, and I quote, somewhat understandable, if not entirely acceptable. The inescapable reality was that 63 lives had been tragically lost. Numerous small commercial ventures that had been painstakingly established by immigrant entrepreneurs over many decades were entirely incinerated, and a defining visual from that time was of Korean-American business proprietors being compelled to assume defensive positions with firearms upon the rooftops of their properties because the local police department had completely withdrawn from providing any form of security presence. And you chose to publicly characterize that specific series of events as understandable. That particular statement is being presented entirely within its proper and correct context. In 2005, you participated in an unpublicized meeting with Louis Farrakhan, a figure officially designated by the Southern Poverty Law Center as among the most prominent anti-Semites within America, alongside other colleagues from the Congressional Black Caucus, ensuring it was a completely private affair with no media presence or official documentation until information was subsequently leaked. Waters' facial expression became noticeably rigid as she clearly had not anticipated that specific accusation being made. In 2008, within the precise confines of this specific chamber during a formal hearing, you officially conveyed a message to a group of senior executives representing major oil companies, and I must emphasize that this complete interaction is recorded on video, Congresswoman, a matter of public record that is easily accessible to any citizen, that should their companies fail to cooperate adequately, you would strongly consider supporting a government initiative to effectively assume control of their commercial operations, which essentially amounts to advocating for the effective socialization of a key private industry during a congressional proceeding and while being explicitly recorded on camera. In 2011, you publicly addressed a crowd stating that a specific political group, commonly known as the Tea Party, could proceed to hell, and you further conveyed that you intended to provide the necessary assistance in facilitating that very journey. Those individuals are fellow Americans, Congresswoman, citizens who pay taxes and exercise their right to vote, and you publicly directed them towards eternal damnation. In 2017, while speaking at a gala event for LGBTQ youth, you made the public statement, and I am quoting directly, "I will go and take Trump out tonight." Now, I am cognizant of the fact that you intended this remark in a political context, and I accept that interpretation. However, I urge you to imagine the national reaction if a Republican official had made a comparable statement regarding President Obama during a similar public event back in 2014. One can only imagine the ensuing FBI investigation and the likely commencement of impeachment hearings. That particular comment was unambiguously, and here he was interrupted again. And subsequent to that, in June 2018, you communicated a message to your supporters, and this is the specific statement that nearly everyone recalls. If you encounter any member of that particular cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you proceed to organize a crowd, and you physically push back against them, and you clearly articulate to them that they are no longer welcome anywhere. Vance recited the entire statement precisely from memory, including every distinct clause and deliberate pause, allowing the chamber to hear the words as if for the first time, stripped of the original rally context and enthusiastic applause. Recontextualized in this formal setting, the words resonated differently, sounding precisely like what they were, an elected public official directing citizens to actively confront other citizens over their personal political beliefs. Even the leadership of your own political party formally condemned your remarks, Congresswoman. Nancy Pelosi, then serving as the Speaker of the House and positioned as the most influential Democrat in the nation, publicly stated that such comments were unacceptable. Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader within the Senate, also addressed the issue directly from the Senate floor, asserting that no individual should ever advocate for the harassment of political opponents. Indeed, a formal resolution was introduced with the explicit purpose of expelling you from Congress. I recommend that you take some time to review the specific language contained within House Resolution 327. That document provides a detailed list of numerous incidents, meticulously cataloging instances of civil unrest, public threats, and the incitement of crowds, spanning a period of 30 years. It is evident that even your closest political allies concluded that you had overstepped appropriate boundaries. He leaned back in his seat and then added, and yet several months later, when you were questioned regarding those highly controversial harassment comments, your response was, and I wish to repeat this precisely, as it may very well be the single most extraordinary sentence articulated in the entire history of American politics. I did not communicate a threat to Trump constituents and supporters. I engage in that behavior all the time, but I did not engage in that behavior on that particular occasion. He allowed the absolute absurdity of the statement to hang in the air for a full 5, perhaps 7 seconds, a sufficient duration for every individual present in the chamber to mentally replay the sentence and fully grasp its reality. You simultaneously issued a complete denial of the action and issued a full confirmation of engaging in it regularly, all within the span of a single sentence. I must admit, Congresswoman, throughout my entire career, during which I have analyzed countless political statements and meticulously studied them during my time at Yale Law School, I have never encountered a comparable utterance. To be able to concurrently assert, I did not perform this action, and I performed this action consistently, requires a level of rhetorical skill that I cannot even begin to comprehend. Basi by si us. A low-volume sound began to ripple through the public gallery, not clearly identifiable as laughter nor entirely as shock, but rather positioned somewhere in between, the distinct auditory reaction of individuals recognizing complete absurdity and remaining uncertain whether to respond with amusement or apprehension. Vance's tone shifted, becoming noticeably hardened, as any residual trace of humor, however minimal, completely dissipated. I have personally been the recipient of death threats since my entry into public life. My spouse, Usha, has also received specific, detailed death threats, articulating precisely what acts of violence would be committed against her. My children, Congresswoman, individuals who are not of voting age, who are not employed in the political sphere, and who are entirely innocent of any wrongdoing beyond having a father in public life, my children have also been subjected to threats. As a direct result, we are compelled to maintain security personnel at our personal residence. My children possess knowledge of what constitutes a panic room, and I contend that no child should ever have to possess knowledge of what a panic room is. He momentarily halted, swallowing before continuing. Every single instance that a prominent public figure with a platform as significant as yours, and you do in fact possess an immense platform, Congresswoman, with millions of followers, regular national cable news appearances, and viral videos, every single time you direct a crowd to push back on individuals, to create a crowd, and to articulate to people that they are not welcome anywhere, those words reach someone who interprets them not as a mere political metaphor, but rather as an explicit authorization, and tragically, some of those individuals act upon that perceived permission. He set his writing utensil down and then deliberately retrieved it, signaling a calculated shift in focus from personal suffering back to a clinical, detailed evaluation. 33 years, Congresswoman. You have occupied a seat in Congress for 33 consecutive years. Over that substantial period, you have publicly characterized multiple presidents as racist. You have directed fellow citizens to proceed to eternal damnation. You have actively encouraged mobs to confront opponents at gasoline stations. You have designated violent civil unrest as a rebellion, and you have even articulated a threat to take out a sitting president. He momentarily halted before asking the crucial question, can you name for me even one single law that you personally authored that directly and meaningfully changed someone's life? Just one specific piece of legislation. Not an instance of casting a vote, not a public address, not a popularized catchphrase, a law with your specific name on it. Waters opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it once more before responding, I have been instrumental in the Community Reinvestment Act, various appropriations for minority-owned financial institutions. Vance interrupted, rephrasing with laser focus, name one single law with your specific name on it that directly changed someone's life. She was utterly incapable of providing an answer. The ensuing silence persisted for 4 seconds, an interval that felt like an eternity on live television broadcast. And in that profound quiet, every individual present in the chamber came to a sudden unspoken understanding of a reality that had been accurate for years, but had never before been explicitly articulated within that venue. Maxine Waters was celebrated for her speaking abilities, not for legislative achievement, nor for constructing anything of substance, nor for tangible solutions like fixing screen doors. She was famous simply for talking. You know, Congresswoman, Vance proceeded, I am of the opinion that the phrase reclaiming my time may very well be the single most authentic statement you have ever publicly uttered, because that is precisely what you have been doing for 33 consecutive years, actively reclaiming time. You have been taking it back from the individuals who are most desperately in need of your legislative efforts, your own constituents and the entire nation, and instead you have expended that time entirely upon yourself, on commanding the attention of cameras, on popularizing catchphrases, and on maintaining your expansive personal estate in Hancock Park, complete with its private indoor swimming facility and secured wrought iron gate. Vance reached for his glass of water, took a measured, slow drink, and then set it down, the vessel making a soft, distinct sound against the table's surface. The entire chamber waited with bated breath.